Good morning. Thanks for joining us for today's episode in our Facebook Live series. I'm your host, historian Edna Friedberg. In each program, we discuss the relevance of Holocaust history to our world today. Now, the focus of today's program may surprise you. We're going to take you to the intersection of Holocaust history and fashion history. As photos come out this morning from last night's Met Gala in New York City, where style icons and celebrities attended fashion's biggest night out, we'll be introducing you to Holocaust survivors who made new lives for themselves via their talents in the fashion industry in America. And we will also learn about Berlin's once booming fashion scene that was shattered by the Nazis. I'm joined today by two special guests. My colleague, Kira Schuster, is a curator here at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Good morning, Kira.
Good morning.
And we're very pleased to welcome Uwe Westphal. Uwe is a journalist and author of the book Fashion Metropolis Berlin, 1836 to 1939, the story of the rise and destruction of the Jewish fashion industry. Welcome to you, Uwe.
Thanks you very much for having me. Thanks, Edna.
During our conversation, please post your questions in the comments section so we can chat with Kira and Uwe, and we'll get to as many as we can during the course of our live show. Now, Uwe, I'd like to start with you. Set the scene for us. Take us inside the bustling fashion district of 1920s and 1930s Berlin and give us a sense of what was known as Berlin chic.
Berlin's fashion district was right in the center of the city, also right in Berlin. And that place was known as Hausvogteiplatz. If you could ask the very famous film actress, German-American actress Marlene Dietrich, where she was going to buy her clothing, that was, of course, at Hausvogteiplatz. By the early 1920s, the 20th century, about 90% of fashion export businesses were Jewish-owned. Fashion became a leading export for Germany and the second largest industry in Berlin. One of these successful Jewish retailers was Nathan Israel's, the department store. Here's the Nathan Israel ad that gives you a sense of the aesthetic they actually had. The company was a superstore, considered as the German equivalent to the well-known department store Harrods in London.
And let's not just talk about this world, we can have a look at it. We have a clip of you, Uwe, on the streets of modern-day Berlin, walking us through what the fashion district looks like now. Let's watch.
And this is actually the center of the Hausvogteiplatz, the old fashion center of Berlin. This memorial you can see here was set up by my publisher, by the Jewish community in Berlin in 1992. Don't forget, in 1938, all of these buildings have been raided by Nazi hooligans. They have thrown out index cards, fabrics. They actually forced them to give up their business. So 2,700 companies were in this immediate neighborhood. Nearly all of them were Jewish, and not a lot of the old buildings are still there, but some.
It's one of those situations where you wonder, what if these walls could talk? What if the sidewalks could tell the stories of the people who used to walk there? And as you said, when the Nazis rose to power in 1933, the Jewish fashion industry was thriving, but it was effectively closed in 1938. However, the damage, the downfall of that scene began 5 years earlier when the Nazis initiated a nationwide economic boycott of Jewish-owned businesses beginning on April 1st, 1933. Signs like we see in this photo posted on a Jewish-owned women's clothing store could be found throughout Germany in the 1930s. And this economic attack devastated the lives of Berlin fashion designers, of clothing producers and retailers. Let's make this personal. Let's talk about one in particular. Who was Norbert Jutschenka and what happened to him?
Well, Norbert was a leading Jewish fashion designer in Berlin for women's clothing. And here we have a photograph of Norbert and his wife, Lieselotte. And they just were fantastic in producing clothing in Berlin. Norbert ran a very successful business at Hausvogteiplatz following modern trends and supporting women's liberation. He was a trendsetter himself. Until this time, nobody talked about Jewish businesses. The Nazis created that in 1933, that the Nazis targeted Jewish-owned businesses. They were all eventually Aryanized. Jewish companies sizing them and installing non-Jewish owners. Norbert was pressured by the Nazis to sell his firm in September in 1938. He agreed to a forced sale of his company. He had to, and that was 86% below its estimated value. Just months later, in November 38, on a night of state-organized violence against Jews in Germany and in Austria, known as Kristallnacht, the Nazis looted and destroyed Jewish businesses, smashing their windows, setting fires to their businesses. This was absolutely devastating for the fashion industry. Thousands of Jewish men were beaten, arrested, and even murdered. Norbert was incredibly fortunate to manage to flee Germany and Berlin. He and his wife emigrated to New York and left all their belongings behind.
And this was about much more than just government action when he's forced to sell his business for a tiny fraction of what it's worth. He was even betrayed by some of his own employees, right? What was that, and how did he go on to rebuild his life?
Rebuilding his life after being exiled was very difficult for anybody, and for fashion designers in particular, because all their creative thinking was based on the Berlin aesthetics. But after arriving in New York, Norbert, he shortened, first of all, his name from Jutschenka to J. So he was Norbert J after the war, and he revisited his old connections after the war. In 1948, he set up, very bravely, a shop on 7th Avenue in Manhattan, a very bold move, and began designing women's clothing again. At his core, he was Berlin haute couture, a designer, and he kept that style. And we can hopefully see some of his designs now. And you can see this is what he did after 1948. And there is one fantastic dress he has designed. We can see this probably soon. There it is. And this is something that has really caught the attention of the media. The New York Times review actually praised his elegance in detail, they wrote. And further, they wrote, he brought renaissance of fashion into New York. And while he was successful until his death in 1953, he never regained the heights of his original Berlin-based company. He had been on track to become a great designer of haute couture like Karl Lagerfeld or Dior, if he hadn't been forced to flee the country.
Yeah, just the cut short, and the way that he was cheated of what he might have been. I mean, looking at those sketches, looking at that photo, just the gorgeous flair, the gestures of the fabric, it's fantastic. I want to pause for a moment to acknowledge our audience and our viewers who are watching from all over the country and all over the world. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. From San Diego, California, St. Louis, Missouri, Tarrytown, New York. Hello to you in Phoenix, in Gastonia, North Carolina, and Omaha, Nebraska. And we're glad to also have international viewers watching from Athens, Greece, as well as Brazil, and also the city of Potsdam, Germany, closer to where you are, Uwe. Uwe, we have an audience question from Edward in Austin, Texas. He is asking whether Norbert Jutschenka was ever compensated for the theft of his business after the war.
Unfortunately not, because he died in 1953, it was too early to ask for full compensation. So he died and none of his capital, basically from his business and his real estate, none of this was compensated.
So again, just injustice upon injustice. But as you mentioned, Norbert Jutschenka was quite lucky, despite his losses, to be able to leave Germany. And at the time that he fled, hundreds of thousands of Jews throughout Europe were desperate to find safe havens. Kira, I'd like to bring you into the conversation to learn about one such person, a woman named Judith Lieber. Many may recognize her name today as a famous high-end handbag designer. And in fact, we're hearing in the comments from quite a few viewers who knew Judith Lieber, who know her name, who follow her work as a designer, but had no idea of her personal story. So fill in that backstory, please. How was her life utterly changed by World War II?
Well, she was born as Judith Petto in Budapest, Hungary. And you'll see here she's photographed with her older sister, Eva. And the two grew up in a very cultured upper middle class home. They spoke multiple languages. And Judith's parents really hoped that she would learn chemistry and have a career making skin creams, maybe go into the makeup industry. And eventually they used to joke she'd be the next Estee Lauder #2, as she put it years later. So when she was around 17 years old in the late 1930s, she traveled to London to study chemistry. And when she returned home for a visit with her family, World War II had broken out in Europe in September 1939. So the family felt it was really best for all of them to stay together. And so she remained in Budapest. Because she couldn't go back to school in London, friends of her father helped Judith get a job at Pessl, which was a Hungarian handbag company. And at first she worked as an assistant running errands, but she refused to keep working at Pessl until she could actually learn the full trade. So Judith learned how to make handbags from start to finish.
And I want to make sure that our viewers who are with us this morning understand the context here of Hungary, that Hungary was a formal ally of Nazi Germany. And as with other allied countries, this paradoxically had a protective effect on Jews who lived there, on some Jews who lived there, because it delayed the time until they would fall under direct German control or occupation. That was the case in Hungary. Life was still very hard. Hungary independently passed its own anti-Semitic laws, but it was not until March 1944 that Germany occupied Hungary. And at that point, German and Hungarian authorities together began to deport Jews from Hungary, from Budapest, the last intact Jewish community in Europe, to the Auschwitz-Birkenau killing center. Uwe, how did Judith and her family manage to evade that fate?
Well, I'll take that one. Things actually became very dangerous in the Budapest Jewish community. Judith's father was arrested while walking down the street one day. He was sent to do forced labor. And it was through family friends that her father was able to obtain protective papers, which were issued by the Swiss mission in Budapest. These documents protected Jews from deportation because Switzerland was still a neutral country and they had maintained diplomatic ties with Germany. And here you can see Judith's protective papers with her name circled in red. Judith and the rest of her family, eventually everyone in the family secured papers as well, which she generously donated to the museum's collections. And you can actually view the entire collection on the museum's website. And the family lived together in a very cramped room with about more than 20 people in an apartment under Swiss jurisdiction. And Judith later said that she would design in her mind imaginary handbags just to get through the misery and kind of distract her from the reality of her situation. In December 1944, everyone living in the protective Swiss apartment was forced into a ghetto. Here you see a photo of Judith from that time. And food was very scarce. She remembered people starving, being left in the street to die. But after about a month, Judith's family was liberated by Soviet forces, and she recalled her joy and just relief at seeing some of the troops walking in with loaves of bread. So by the end of that summer, quite a few months later, Judith was able to start working again. She reconnected with the owner of Pessl and went back to making handbags, which helped her pay for essential items for her and her family in the chaotic aftermath of World War II. And that same year, she met a Jewish American GI named Gerson Gus Lieber, who was stationed in Budapest. Gus and Judith married the following year in 1946. This is actually their engagement photo, and you can see he's wearing his military uniform. And so Judith sailed with Gus to New York City that same year, where they rebuilt their lives together.
And the story of Judith's family and those protective papers is not unique. Some 50,000 other Jews in Budapest also survived thanks to Swiss protective papers issued at the initiative of one single Swiss diplomat, a brave and compassionate man named Karl Lutz. So we really want to pay tribute and honor to the memory of Karl Lutz today. Now, Kira, after this tumultuous survival story, how did Judith go from, making handbags in Budapest to eventually designing bags that we now see on the arms of glamorous celebrities and even presidential wives here in the US.
In New York, her skills were greatly in demand. She worked for several firms designing handbags. And unlike many garment factory workers who maybe only focused on like one part of the the whole process, Judith knew the entire process from start to finish. So she could make all of those handbags from beginning to end. And her career really took off when First Lady Mamie Eisenhower was spotted holding one of her very intricate beaded purses, which you can actually see Mrs. Eisenhower holding in this photograph. And it was designed by Judith while she was working for a company called Nettie Rosenstein. And so as a result of this publicity, Judith's name started to generate attention in the press. After Rosenstein decided to move their headquarters abroad, Gus convinced Judith to start their own company together. In 1963, the couple set up shop in a small New York City office, and they just tapped into Judith's reputation and all of her contacts. And that's really when her bags, started to attract the attention of other first ladies and even more celebrities. And you can see this great photo of Judith with a wide variety of bags that she had created. So her kind of iconic designs were these little crystal studded whimsical creations, a wide variety of objects from food to things, to toys, to, just quite unbelievable what came out of her mind. And for me personally, she came to my attention back when I was watching the 1996 Oscars, and actress Christine Cavanaugh, who did the voice of Babe the Pig in the movie Babe, was actually carrying a small crystal pig purse on the red carpet. So that's where I first learned who Judith was. In the early 1990s, Judith received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Council of Fashion Designers in America, and it had never been given to a handbag designer before. She sold the company and retired in the 1990s. Judith and Gus both passed away in 2018, actually on the same day within hours of each other. But her handbags are still sold and worn by celebrities on the red carpet. Here we see Alicia Keys holding a Judith Lieber bag of a little boom box. There's also, you can see here a watermelon, a gummy bear, a rose. And even last night at the Met Gala, multiple celebrities were spotted holding her bags to match their outfits.
It's really an enduring legacy, these playful and blingy designs. One of our viewers, a woman named Dana in Illinois, writes, "I was a buyer in Chicago. I bought from Judith Lieber, and I knew her and her amazing bags." And we're glad to be able to fill in more of this backstory about where she came from and how she got her start. Now, although Judith Lieber and Norbert Uchenka were able to leave Europe, and their portable skills from the fashion world helped them to begin anew, for some Jews in Europe, for many others, working in clothing production actually had a much, much grimmer side to it and meant the difference between life and death. Uwe, I know from talking to you that in the course of your research, you learned a great deal about the role of forced labor and clothing production in the Nazi camp and ghetto system. Tell us about that, please.
Forced labor played a very important part in the entire Nazi economic system. I knew forced labor for clothing production was happening in concentration camps for a long time. I hadn't learned until recently that it also happened in Auschwitz. Some Auschwitz prisoners were forced to produce haute couture clothing based on sketches taken from designers in Berlin. Many previously owned Jewish companies in Berlin were now ordering designer collections from concentration camps that were made by prisoners, some of whom were Jewish, though not all were. Sewing machines were stolen from Jewish-owned department stores and workshops, and used clothing was confiscated from victims who were murdered at Auschwitz. The Lodz ghetto in the German-occupied Poland was another major site of forced labor clothing production. Lodz was a traditional textile city that had a lot of existing resources. After the Germans established the ghetto in 1940, they forced tens of thousands of ghetto residents to work in factories and workshops. Like Auschwitz, Lodz had a section there where haute couture produced. And all of this was just a nightmare that was happening, and some people even don't believe that it happened until today. Lodz became one of the Nazis' most important and lucrative clothing factories. Most of the German uniforms were produced there, but also civilian clothing. The skills of Jewish seamstresses and tailors were indeed life-saving. Working as a forced laborer and the ability to produce clothing often kept prisoners alive. However, many did not survive or were never compensated for the years of forced labor.
And you've taught us something really very disturbing today, Uwe. I've been aware, and I imagine many other people have been aware, of the use of enslaved prisoners to produce clothing and other items in support of the German war effort. But the idea that they were in these nightmarish conditions producing, glamorous outfits or high fashion is just a horrible, horrible dissonance to absorb.
Absolutely.
Kira, let's once again bring in the personal impact of this. A man named Martin Greenfield was among those who survived because he was chosen to do forced labor. In his case, a job working in the laundry at Auschwitz helped him to survive. And later, after the war, Martin became a suit maker to the highest echelons of American society, working with movie stars and athletes and American presidents. But tell us about who he was before he changed his name to Martin Greenfield.
Well, there was nothing about his early life that would have suggested that fashion would become his business. Martin was only 15 years old when the Germans and their Hungarian collaborators surrounded the homes in his village of Pavlovo and gave Jewish residents just 1 hour to pack anything they could carry. After about a month, Martin and his immediate family, who you see here in this photo, which included a younger sister and a baby brother, were all deported to Auschwitz. And only Martin and his father survived the selection that day. Martin had some experience fixing cars, so he was chosen to work as a mechanic, but also, more importantly, he was chosen to work in the laundry facility. And so soon after arriving at Auschwitz, Martin's father made a very painful decision that his son did not understand at the time, but ultimately helped the teenager survive.
We can hear from Martin in his own voice, his own words, describing his instructions from his father. Let's take a look at this clip.
My father always talked to me about survival, that if whatever we do, we should always believe that we're going to survive this here, and we're going to find each other, and we look for each other, but we should not be together. If we have to work or we have to be in a camp, we should be separated. We'll be stronger that way. We have more chance. We don't suffer together. So that's what he tried to do, to separate us, and they did. I was upset with my dad for a few minutes, but then I realized that if I was with him, because I saw fathers and sons and brothers, then none of them survived, because anything happens to one, happened to the other, because you suffer double. Then I realized how smart my father was and how he prepared me for this survival. He says, we have to survive. We are going to survive.
Very difficult legacy, and we want to give our thanks to the USC, the USC Shoah Foundation for sharing this moving testimony so that we could all watch it today. In the end, Martin was the only member of his family, not his father, not anyone else, to survive the Holocaust. After a death march, he reached the Buchenwald concentration camp, where in April 1945, he was liberated by American troops, and we see him shortly after the war, I believe in a displaced persons camp, before he immigrated to America. Now, Kira, how did Martin go on to translate this painful past into a career in fashion, and how did he eventually come to dress a personal hero of his?
After liberation, when Martin learned that none of his family had survived, an uncle from America reached out to him. So it turned out that Martin had several family members who were willing to take him in, and one of them lived in Brooklyn, New York. So there, once in Brooklyn, a friend got him a job at a suit factory called 3Gs, and Martin very quickly climbed the ranks and moved up into management. So in 1949, just 5 years after his liberation from Buchenwald, Martin's boss asked him to oversee the production of a wardrobe for Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was now the president of Columbia University in New York. As Supreme Allied Commander, Eisenhower had come to Ohrdruf, which was a subcamp of Buchenwald, just days after liberation to witness the camp. And you can see him visiting the camp in this photograph. And Eisenhower insisted that the concentration camps be documented as a means to combat attempts to deny the Holocaust in the future. So for Martin, himself being a survivor of Buchenwald, dressing Ike was truly, truly an honor. But he wasn't too starstruck to offer a little bit of advice. And Martin actually tucked notes into the suit, offering foreign policy suggestions that he tucked into the pockets of the suit that they had made.
It's what we would call in Yiddish or Hebrew chutzpah. He had some audacity to do that. And of course, Eisenhower would go on to become president of the United States. It was our honor to host his granddaughter, Susan Eisenhower, for a show this past January, which you can watch on Facebook, talking about her grandfather and his legacy of leadership and the importance of witnessing the evidence of atrocities after the war. Now, Kira, Martin Greenfield would go on to own his own label, named in his own name, and also to design private labels of suits for major department stores, high-end stores like Neiman Marcus. Before he retired, he made suits for a whole string of American presidents, famous athletes, including the basketball player LeBron James. And we have a photograph here of Martin with President Barack Obama, who was the last sitting president that he dressed. Most recently, Martin Greenfield's factory was a filming location for the hit TV show, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. So his fingerprints are all over the place. To what factors did Martin attribute his success in the fashion world?
Well, Edna, as you and I know, many survivors we've spoken to describe the, feeling so much guilt for having lived when so many others did not. But Martin felt that his father really gave him the most selfless gift. His father released his son from his guilt and urged him to live a happy life. And Martin said his father's last words to him were, "Honor us by living, by not feeling sorry for us."
That's a very powerful charge to give. I imagine it's much easier to understand it intellectually than to actually embody it emotionally.
Absolutely.
Several viewers have written in to tell us that their own relatives were also Holocaust survivors or are Holocaust survivors who worked in fashion and the apparel industry. We're really glad. We'd love to hear more about your stories and also to acknowledge that the 2 or 3 stories that we are highlighting today are just a few of many, many such skills. For example, a viewer named Faye tells us, my uncle, Melvin Reich, was a Holocaust survivor who had a buttonhole business in New York's Garment District, and he lived to be almost 102. Thank you very much for that, Faye. And also I'll think about and just share that my own father, who was a survivor, when he came to the U.S., he made a living by working in a girls' clothing factory. That's how he learned to say colors in English. I always remember him telling me that. So before we go on, I also want to bring in another viewer question from Dina Gold, who actually is a journalist and author herself. We've had the pleasure of doing programs with her. So hi, Dina. Dina writes in from Washington to say, clearly the Jewish fashion designers were hugely influential. What recognition is given by today's German fashion industry to their Jewish predecessors? Uwe, can you address that, please?
Yes, I can. And the answer is actually very short. There is no recognition of the Jewish fashion design over a time stretch between 1836 to, the end of the fashion industry in 1939 in Germany. And this is very, very unfortunate. There is just one memorial in Berlin. I was involved in setting it up. But even the fashion world is not, I don't know what it is. It's not interested. I mean, there have been banks, there have been German industries. They actually have recognized what they did during the Second World War or in forced labor camps. None of this actually happened with the fashion industry, and the German Fashion Council has ignored all my requests to do exactly that. For example, having a young, talented designer, fashion designer award in Berlin in the name of the founders of the Jewish fashion industry or the Berlin fashion industry altogether. It just doesn't happen. It's very, very slow. And I feel sometimes I'm running against a wall of silence.
Well, we are disturbed by that wall of silence too, and hope that programs like this one will help to draw attention and help people to want to make some noise for them to acknowledge not just complicity, but also what is the legacy, what is the creative heritage that is there and that can be carried on. You have been involved with some young people who have wanted to honor the legacy of these designers. Share some of that with us, please.
Well, that happened exactly 5,000 miles away from Berlin, in Atlanta, in Georgia. And I had this amazing experience more recently speaking to students from Clark University in Atlanta who were particularly moved by Jewish designer Kurt Ehrenfreund's experience. Kurt, to wrap it up very briefly, fled Berlin for Amsterdam in April 1933. And after the boycott of Jewish businesses, and was able to start anew. But after the German invasion of the Netherlands, he suffered again in the hands of the Nazis and his business was confiscated. So he escaped with the help of the Dutch underground and later emigrated to the United States, to Los Angeles. The students in Atlanta at Clark University actually used one of his designs for an outfit they actually created at the university. On the left side is the drawing which was given to me by Kurt Ehrenfreund in 1988. He has drawn, and this is a model he called Lafayette. And this model on the right-hand side, this is something what the design students did. They included the names of Jewish designers and Jewish-owned stores that were lost during the Holocaust. The names are attached to shards of glass that are woven into the dress in memory of the attacks of Kristallnacht, known as the Night of Broken Glass. It is a very moving tribute to those whose lives were actually upended by the destruction of the industry. And I wish there would be German universities of design students, fashion design students, they would do the same kind of thing.
Gives me chills to look at that, to see, you know, that the shards of glass with the names
Absolutely,
of those,
yeah.
that they're piercing the fabric. Thank you for that, and hopefully that will inspire some others to do similar things. I'd like to close with a couple of comments from viewers that I want to make sure, Kira and Uwe, that you hear. A viewer named Nancy writes, "I often wonder of the 6 million, how many would not only have created fashion, but a cure for cancer or other diseases around the world." So all the lost potential, the careers cut short. More specific to our topic, Matthew from Philadelphia writes in to say, "This is absolutely fascinating. I teach my 7th grade religious school students about Martin Greenfield, Tailor to the Presidents, and thank you," from Philadelphia. So I would like to add my thanks on behalf of our audience. Thank you, Kira and Uwe, for joining us today and sharing your insights, but also your passions with our audience. We were so glad to have you.
Thank you for having us.
We know that, as usual, we have only scratched the surface of a very complex topic, and we hope that this inspires you to learn more about the once lively streets of Berlin's Old Fashion District, how clothing as a portable skill could provide a chance for some to start over, and how the legacies of these talented individuals can still be found in many places, not only on the red carpet, but also in universities and design ateliers today. We also hope that you will join us for our next program on a very, very different topic. On September 30th at 9:30 a.m., we will be marking the 80th anniversary of one of the largest mass shooting massacres conducted during the Holocaust. We will be examining evidence that reveals how the Nazis and local collaborators carried out the Holocaust by bullets across occupied Eastern Europe, leading to the murder of as many as 2 million Jewish civilians, men, women, and children. Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope to see you on September 30th, and until then, be healthy and well wherever you are. Bye-bye.